Hey Nature School, my name is Miss Melissa, and today we are going to talk about bats. Who's ever seen a bat before? Bats are pretty cool, aren't they? And this is actually National Bat Week. So I will post some links throughout this week to different activities and information that is provided to all of us about good information about bats and fun things to do that you can do with your family and things like that. So let's get started, okay? Since it's Halloween time, it's the perfect time to talk about bats. And why do you think that bats are associated with Halloween? Any guesses? So bats are way back when they were associated with Halloween, because when they fly around and then land and they wrap their wings around themselves, people used to think that was what witches would do, is with their big cloaks, they would wrap themselves up with cloaks. So they kind of associated bats with witches. They also thought that that witches used bats in a lot of their brews. So whether it was pieces of them or something else. Can you think of a type of bat that would be associated with Halloween? Like a vampire bat. Vampire bats, they don't really suck blood like you might think. They will bite an animal, usually a cow, and their face is actually flat. They look kind of funny. So their face is flat so that they can get a nice little chomp with their teeth. And then they have an anticoagulant, which basically just makes you continuously bleed instead of your blood clotting and scarring over like it normally does. And it just lets blood kind of drip out of that cow, and they lick it up. And they only eat about a half a teaspoon. That's all they need. Pretty neat, huh? Most types of bats, they don't have to eat every day. They should, but they don't have to. But vampire bats, they do have to eat every day or they could die. And that's because blood is easily digestible to them, so they have to be able to continuously go out every night and feed when they can. Does anybody know how many different types of bats there are in the world? There's over 1,000 different species of bats. Do you know how many live in Ohio? We have about 13 species that live in Ohio. And there's bats that are called microbats, and there's also bats that are called megabats. Microbats are what we have in Ohio. They're smaller and they're insect eaters. Megabats live in warmer places like South America, and they eat fruits, and sometimes they do eat bugs, but their main diet is going to be fruits. So we don't have those around here. Megabats are usually a lot bigger than the microbats, so we don't get to see the really cool ones around here. Does anyone know why bats might be important? Bats are actually really important to most ecosystems. And microbats, since they eat, what did I say? Insects. They need to eat a lot of insects in order for them to survive. So one bat in one night can eat anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 insects. That's a lot of insects. And so that's why we need to help protect some of these bats, because without bats, a lot of our crops would be destroyed, or farmers would have to use even more pesticides on our food to keep it protected from insects. So bats help to control the insect population. If you don't like mosquitoes, you definitely want some bats around your house or wherever you're walking so that you don't get eaten alive by mosquitoes. Bats are also important because they can be pollinators. So our megabats that are going to be eating lots of fruit, they can actually pollinate some of those fruits down in South America. Just by eating the fruit, they're going to rub on those flowers. Some actually have really long tongues, and they can drink the nectar out of their flowers. In South America and even in Texas, they have hummingbird feeders set out during the day. I'm sure some of you have hummingbird feeders too. And they have to bring them in at night, otherwise the bats will drink the nectar from the hummingbird feeders, and then they have to fill them every day. So they just bring them inside and protect them that way. In Ohio, we have two different types of bats. We have some bats that like to live in caves or crevices, and we have some bats that like to be in trees. Usually the ones that live in caves, they are going to live in colonies. So there's going to be a lot of them, and then the ones that live in trees are usually going to be by themselves. The ones that are by themselves are also usually going to migrate, and the ones in caves are going to hibernate in the caves. The first bat we're going to talk about is my favorite bat. They're called red bats. And they look just like they sound. They are red, and they have these white, really white shoulder flashes. And so that's how you can tell it's a red bat. These are usually a tree roosting species. A lot of times they like to hang out in shagbark hickory, which those trees have kind of shaggy bark, and it's very easy for them to climb up and hide underneath. Another bat that we have here in Ohio is called a hoary bat, and they have really thick fur, and the tips of their ears have black around the outline of them, and these are about 4 to 6 inches long. So most of our bats are really not that big at all. These bats are also known to have twins, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but did you know that a bat is a mammal? It's the only flying mammal. So they have wings, and they have bones in their wings that kind of look like our arm. So the fingers, it's got the bone to here, it has an elbow, and it comes up to the shoulder. So their arms look like this, and our arms are more straight out. They also have skin that attaches between their arm, so that's how they're able to fly. Another thing about bats is they come out at nighttime, so they're nocturnal. But I said they eat insects, right? Do you think it's easy for them to see an insect? No, they use echolocation, and so they send out these signals, and they are able to find their food that way. We were at a conference a couple years ago and learned the coolest thing, and it's called a jamming signal. So if there's other bats in the area that they're competing for food with, they send out this signal that messes up the other one's echolocation, and then they miss the insect, and then the bat that sent out the jamming signal is able to catch that insect. But some insects have learned this jamming signal, and they do it to the bats in order to avoid being eaten. Isn't that so smart? Usually when bats eat, I always thought that they would fly around and they just catch the insect in their mouth. They don't. They'll actually use their tail a lot of times and swoop that, and it kind of pushes the insect into their mouth that way. We also have a bat called an eastern small-footed bat, and it's just like it sounds. It's a pretty tiny bat, and they have these teeny tiny little feet. Ohio is home to several different species of endangered bats, which one of these bats just got listed as endangered this past year. It's called a little brown bat. The sad part is just a couple years ago, little brown bats were considered our most common bat and had the most residents here in Ohio. Bummer, right? The reason why their numbers have decreased so much is because of a fungus called white nose syndrome. And this is a disease that came over from Europe. It was first spotted in New York State, and it's kind of moved its way through the state. It only affects bats that hibernate in caves. They have not formed an immunity to it, which is kind of strange. Usually by now we start to see some sort of immunity buildup. But what it does is it attacks the inside as they're hibernating, and then it makes them wake up because they're using so much energy to fight off this fungus that then they're trying to find food, and they can't find food, and they ultimately usually die from this. Once the disease gets really far along, it shows white nose. It looks like they have this white fuzzy grossness coming out of their nose. They also get it on their wings. It spreads to a lot of the caves. and it spreads throughout the whole colony really quickly. When one bat is infected with it, they say it's almost a 90% death rate in the first year that it's in that cave. That's a lot. That's not many bats that are left after that first round. So it's been passing through lots of caves. There's been lots of studies in order to figure out a cure for this. There has been some fungicide type of creams that have seemed to help, but it's hard to put those all over a cave and try to treat them that way. They are finding that UV light will actually help with this, but again, it's kind of an ongoing situation. But that's a big reason why we're seeing a huge decrease in our bats. And it's not just Ohio, like I said, it's pretty much across the United States. Okay, let's talk about some other bats that aren't found in Ohio. So the first one is called the Mexican free-tailed bat. And this one is pretty easy to identify because it doesn't have the skin attaching to its tail. So most bats, when they look like this, they have their tail on the bottom and they have skin that attaches to it. The Mexican free-tailed bat does not have that skin. It still has the tail, but no skin attaching to it. These are especially found in a place called Bracken Cave, and this is like one of my bucket list places to visit. And what happens is there's tons of bats that live in this cave, and it takes them 3 to 4 hours to leave the cave at night. So I'll probably post a link to a video so you guys can see this, but it's pretty amazing of how many bats come out of this. And they say they can eat 250 tons of insects in one night from all of these bats that leave that cave. Pretty neat. Another bat is called the bumblebee bat, and they're like teeny tiny. They're probably like the size of your thumb. They're also the smallest mammal that lives in the world. They are found in Thailand. The biggest bat that lives in the world is the giant golden-crowned flying fox. Say that 10 times fast. A flying fox they're huge. Their wingspan can be about 5 feet. They stand maybe 3 foot tall. These are fruit-eating bats. These are the ones that people might associate with vampires, because could you imagine walking outside and this big bat is just hanging off of your porch? They are amazing to see in real life. Sometimes zoos have them. There is a bat sanctuary up in Michigan. I forget what it's called, but they have them. So there are chances for you to see them, not just out in the wild. Okay, so now we are going to kind of bust some myths about bats. I know some people are scared of bats, and that's okay to be scared of things. There's things that I don't like. I don't like clowns. But one of the myths are that bats get stuck in your hair. No, bats don't get stuck in your hair. A lot of times when they're swooping down close to you, it's because there's a yummy, tasty bug that's probably close to your head, and they don't even realize that you're there. They're just trying to find their own food. We talked about this one already. Can bats suck your blood? Nope. They can't, or they don't. Like we said, do you remember what animal that they go after? A cow. Yep. Oh, here's a good one. Bats have rabies. Have you heard of that? Some people think that all bats are rabies and that they're disease-ridden and all of that, and they're not. It's actually really, really rare for a bat to have rabies. It's not impossible, but for the most part, bats don't have rabies. You're more likely to encounter a raccoon or a dog or something like that that has rabies than a bat. The last one is bats are dirty. Nope. Bats are very, very clean. They work really hard to make sure that their fur is healthy and that their wings are ready to go, just like a bird does, because if they can't fly, they can't eat. So they have to make sure that they're nice and clean and ready to go. Does anyone know what bat poop is called? It's called guano. And it's the best way to tell if you have a bat near you. So if you find a tree, you can find guano that has it below, and you probably know that you've got a bat around. So now, what are some ways that you can help bats? One of them is putting a bat house up. These can be tricky because they don't always take to them, especially the first couple years. It takes a while for a bat to find a bat house. You have to be specific of where you put them. A lot of people put them on like a tree or something like that, and they actually prefer to be on a pole in kind of the middle of a clearing. You also want them to be able to get the most sunlight for the day because their house needs to be super, super warm. And even in the middle of summer, you want it as warm as possible. The other thing that we can do to help protect bats is make sure that we're not using pesticides on a lot of our plants, because remember, they're eating insects. And if these insects have gotten into pesticide or something like that and they haven't died or they're able to fly, then that bat is getting that pesticide and that can ultimately kill them. Same thing with birds and a lot of other animals. So if we can be as clean as possible while we're trying to take care of the pests in our garden, it helps out a lot more than just our gardens.
Okay, so I am out here at Edison Woods and I'm lucky enough because some of the bats are coming out. We have several bats that live out here, mainly big brown bats. And how you can tell that it's a bat when they're flying and not a bird is there's like a separation between their body and their wing. So you'll see like they look like big flying fuzzy little footballs. And then their wings are much thicker and wider than a bird. So they look a little bit different. I really didn't think that I would find bats. It's been so cold lately, and then today was the first day in probably 4 or 5 days that it hasn't been raining, and it's actually just about 60 degrees. So it's still warm enough for them to not be fully hibernating, and they can come out and search for some bugs just to keep getting ready for that hibernation season. Our natural resource manager, Tara, she comes out in the summertime and does a bat study, and she'll sit out here and she'll count how many bats come out of their roosting area in early summer and then again in late summer. And the point is to figure out how many babies were born. We had talked earlier about echolocation and how bats find their food, and we have something called a bat detector, and I didn't bring it tonight because like I said, I didn't think that I'd see any bats, but what it does is it picks up the frequency of their echolocation. So different bats have different frequencies. So that's how we know that these are big brown bats. Not that we've caught any of them, but because that's where their frequency shows up on the bat detector.
All right, you guys, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Happy Halloween.